Hubby announced at our son's graduation he was leaving with his assistant and taking everything we had. Imagine this: your whole life is suddenly flipped upside down at the worst possible moment. Your daughter's graduation, the one day you're supposed to be celebrating. But instead of a proud moment, you're faced with a betrayal so big, you can't even process it. My husband, the man I spent 20 years building a life with, announced he was leaving me and taking everything. Stay tuned to find out how I turned the tables and got my revenge. You won't believe what happened next. I never imagined my daughter's high school graduation would turn into the stage for my husband's ultimate betrayal. That morning, everything seemed perfect. The sun was shining over Austin High School, the air buzzing with excitement as families gathered to celebrate their children's accomplishments. Parents were beaming, students were hugging, and the sound of laughter and chatter filled the open field where the ceremony was set up. My daughter, Madison, stood tall in her cap and gown, a vision of grace and determination. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, earning a full scholarship to Stanford, something Derek and I had always dreamed of for her. I should have been soaking in this moment, holding on to the joy of it. Instead, something felt off, and deep down I knew why. For 20 years, I had been the perfect wife at least. That's what I told myself. Derek and I built a life together, brick by brick, from the moment we said I do fresh out of college. I was the one who handled the finances, made sure our bills were paid on time, saved for Madison's education, and ensured we had a comfortable life. Derek, with his charisma and sharp business sense, thrived as a real estate developer. He had the confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. And for years, I believed what he wanted was us, our family. But looking back, I see the cracks that had been forming, the way he had grown distant, the late nights at the office, the vague explanations, the way he never really looked at me anymore, not the way he used to. I had spent months pretending it was just stress, that maybe he was overwhelmed with work, but I knew better. As we gathered after the ceremony for photos, Derek kept glancing at his phone, his expression tense. His assistant Chelsea was there too, standing just a little too close, her manicured nails tapping against her champagne glass, her blonde hair shining under the Texas sun. She was young, mid to late 20s, the kind of woman who thrived on being the center of attention. Officially, she was there to help coordinate the dinner celebration. But the way she hovered near Derek, the way her gaze flickered between us, made my stomach twist. Then, it happened. Derek clinked his glass, commanding everyone's attention. I turned toward him, expecting a heartfelt toast about Madison's hard work and bright future. But the moment he opened his mouth, I felt the floor shift beneath me. "I have an important announcement," he said, his voice steady but unnervingly cold. "Chelsea and I are in love. We're leaving tonight to start a new life together." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My ears rang. I saw Madison's face drain of color, her hands gripping the sides of her gown as if grounding herself. My heart pounded so hard, I thought I might collapse right there in front of everyone. But Derek wasn't done. "I've already moved our savings," he continued, oblivious to the weight of his words, crushing the people he was supposed to love. Everything is set. The audacity, the sheer cruelty. He had waited for this moment, the moment that should have been Madison's to drop this bomb, to blindside me in front of our family, our friends, our daughter. As if this was some sort of grand finale for him, as if he wanted to walk away feeling powerful, victorious, leaving me in the wreckage. Chelsea, that smug little snake, had the nerve to lift her champagne glass and smirk. "First-class flight to Hawaii," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "We'll be sipping cocktails on the beach by morning." The whispers started, guests shifting uncomfortably, some exchanging looks of disbelief, others clearly wondering if they should leave. Madison's breath hitched beside me. She was trembling. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the kind of rage that made my vision sharpen, that made everything around me slow down. But then, something clicked. I felt calm. because unlike Derek, I was prepared. Months ago, when I first noticed the discrepancies in our finances, when I saw the hotel bills, the jewelry purchases, the secret plane tickets, I knew, but I didn't confront him. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I planned. And now, standing there in the middle of that stunned crowd, Derek looking at me like he was expecting me to fall apart, Chelsea clinging to him like she had just won the lottery, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Derek, ever the performer, turned to me, his expression a mix of triumph and something else, pity. "I've left you enough for a few months of expenses," he said magnanimously, like he was doing me some grand favor. I think that's more than fair. Fair. He thought this was fair, stealing our savings, abandoning our daughter, humiliating me. This man who had once promised me forever was standing there, so sure that he had played his cards right, that he had won. I tilted my head, studying him, letting the silence stretch between us. "Considering what?" I finally said, my voice steady. Derek faltered slightly, his confidence flickering. "What?" I stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Considering that I helped build your business from scratch? That I handled our finances while you focused on your career? Or considering that I've known about your plan for months?" His smirk froze. Chelsea's grip on his arm tightened. The first flicker of doubt crept into Derek's eyes. I reached into my purse, fingers grazing the thick manila envelope I had prepared. The weight of it felt like victory. "You know, Derek," I said, my voice almost sweet, "for someone who prides himself on attention to detail, you really should have been more careful with your email password." His face blanched. Chelsea blinked. "What does she mean, Derek?" The first pulled out the envelope and held it up between us, letting the moment hang in the air. Derek's eyes darted to it, then back to me. He knew. And for the first time that day, I saw it real fear. It was my turn to smile. I could see the exact moment. Derek realized he had underestimated me. His smirk flickered, his eyes darting between me and the envelope in my hand. Chelsea, still gripping his arm like a lifeline, frowned, her confidence cracking for the first time. The once smug tilt of her chin wavered as she glanced at him, searching for reassurance. But Derek had nothing to give her. His lips parted slightly, as if trying to form words, but nothing came out. He wasn't used to being caught off guard. He was the man who always controlled the room, the conversation, the narrative. But not today. I took a slow breath, savoring the shift in power. For someone who thinks he's always the smartest guy in the room, Derek, you really should have been more careful. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Around us, the crowd of family and friends remained frozen in place, caught between the wreckage of what should have been a celebration and the unfolding chaos of Derek's disastrous announcement. I could see my mother standing near the buffet table, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. My best friend, Ava, clutched her champagne glass so tightly I was surprised it hadn't shattered. And then there was Madison, my daughter, standing just a few feet away, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, betrayal. Derek's betrayal wasn't just mine to bear. It was hers, too. "Mom," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I turned to her, meeting her wide eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart." And it was, because I had planned for this. Derek finally seemed to shake himself from his stupor. He straightened his shoulders, clearing his throat like he was about to take back control of the situation. "Vivian, let's not turn this into a scene," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, like he was talking to a child throwing a tantrum. A bitter laugh bubbled up inside me, but I swallowed it down. A scene? That's what he thought this was? The man had just stood up in front of our daughter's graduation party and announced that he was leaving me for his assistant, stealing our savings in the process, and he had the nerve to suggest I shouldn't make a scene? I tilted my head. A scene? Oh, Derek, you poor, clueless man. This isn't a scene. This is a reckoning. The color in his face shifted just slightly. a faint flush of red creeping up his neck. He wasn't used to being talked to like that, especially not by me. Chelsea shifted uncomfortably, her fingers digging into his arm. "What is she talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharp now, a hint of panic seeping in. I ignored her, my gaze locked on Derek. 3 months ago, I continued, my voice calm, steady, unwavering, I started noticing discrepancies in our accounts. You were sloppy. Little transfers at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, but you got greedy. And unfortunately for you, I happen to be very, very good at tracking money. Derek's jaw tightened. He wanted to interrupt, to shut me up, to do something, anything, to regain control, but he couldn't, because I wasn't done. I started looking into your business expenses too, I said, letting the words land like blows. The fancy dinners, the jewelry, the 5-star hotels, all booked under your corporate account, which, by the way, is considered embezzlement. Did you really think your company wouldn't notice eventually? I saw it then. Fear. A flash of it in his eyes before he masked it with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I countered, stepping closer. "And so does your company's legal team. You might want to check your email, Derek. The board has been reviewing your expenses. I wonder what they'll think when they see that little Cayman Islands account you've been funneling money into." The silence in the room was deafening. Chelsea gasped, turning to Derek in horror. "Cayman Islands?" she hissed. "You told me everything was legitimate." Derek finally broke, turning toward her with barely contained rage. "Chelsea, shut up." But she wasn't done. "You promised me security," she spat. "You said we'd be fine." I almost pitied her. Almost. I let the moment hang before delivering the final blow. "And then there's the little matter of your transfer request, Chelsea." Her head snapped back to me, her brows furrowing. "What?" "You see, my dear," I said, my voice dripping with mock sweetness, "it seems you were planning to relocate to Derek's new office in Hawaii. Funny thing, though HR flagged your request for review. Something about workplace ethics and inappropriate relationships. I believe the words immediate termination were mentioned." Her face drained of color. Derek sucked in a breath, his hands balling into fists at his sides. I turned to him, my voice deadly soft. "You thought you could humiliate me? Thought you could steal from me? From Madison? And just waltz away into the sunset with your little plaything?" I shook my head slowly. "You were never going to win this, Derek." He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but before he could get a word out, a new voice cut through the tension. "Dad." Madison stepped forward, standing tall, proud, unshaken. Derek turned toward her, his face flickering with something close to regret. "Mads, sweetheart, Don't," she interrupted, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "Don't talk to me like I'm 5. Don't pretend you care. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this today. Of all days." She shook her head, blinking back tears. "I thought you were better than this." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air, and then Chelsea did the unexpected. She stepped away from Derek. "You know what?" she said, her voice laced with fury. "I don't need this." She ripped off the expensive bracelet he had bought her, throwing it at his chest. "Enjoy your train wreck, Derek." And just like that, she turned on her heel and stormed out. I almost laughed. Derek, however, looked lost. For the first time, I saw him for what he really was. Small, weak, desperate. But I wasn't done. I took one final step toward him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Checkmate." And with that, I turned to the stunned crowd, raising my glass. "Well, now that the entertainment's over, let's get back to celebrating Madison." A beat of silence, then applause, laughter. Derek stood there, frozen, as everyone turned away from him. And just like that, he lost everything. You'll never guess what happened. Right after I found out he was hiding all that money, his secret accounts. I knew he was up to something, but I had no idea just how deep the lies went. And when I decided to confront him, I could feel his world starting to crumble. So, what do you think happened next? Did I let him get away with it, or did I expose him for good? Drop a comment, #1 if you think he escaped, #2 if you think I got the upper hand. I still remember the exact moment I really knew that Derek was cheating. It wasn't the late nights at the office, though those had started happening more often. It wasn't the way he avoided my gaze when I asked simple questions about his schedule, or even the way his phone was suddenly glued to him, screen turned away any time I walked by. Those were all red flags, sure, but I had spent years convincing myself that marriage had phases, that stress did things to people, that work pressure sometimes bled into personal lives. No, the moment I knew was when I checked our bank statements and saw something that didn't belong, a hotel charge at the Four Seasons in downtown Austin. On a Tuesday, I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tightening around my phone. Derek had told me he was working late that night, dealing with an urgent client request. He had even texted me saying not to wait up, but here, right in front of me, was proof. He wasn't at the office. He was in a hotel. And this wasn't a business expense, it was personal. The charge wasn't buried under corporate accounts or disguised as a work trip. It was right there, sitting in our joint account, as if he hadn't even bothered to hide it. Something inside me cracked. It wasn't a sharp break, not the kind that shatters all at once. It was slow, like the splintering of wood under too much pressure. I wanted to scream, to call him, to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I breathed. I had spent my entire career in corporate finance. Numbers didn't lie. Money left a trail. And Derek, arrogant as ever, thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I was too trusting, too oblivious, too wrapped up in being a wife and mother to pay attention. That was his first mistake. I sat at my desk, pulse steady, mind sharpening. If he thought he could play me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I pulled up our accounts, scanning through every transaction over the past 6 months. The hotel charge wasn't the only one. There were dinners at high-end restaurants, places we had never been to together, jewelry purchases, spa visits, plane tickets. Not for work trips for 2 people? I cross-referenced the dates against his calendar, matching each charge to nights he had claimed to be busy. The pattern was so obvious it was almost insulting. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more than transactions. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away. So, I did what any meticulous woman with a financial background would do. I started tracking him. I called in a favor from an old friend, someone who worked in private investigations. It didn't take long for the reports to come in. Surveillance photos, dinner dates, Chelsea clinging to his arm. His car parked outside her apartment overnight. They weren't even discreet. They acted like they had nothing to hide, like I was nothing more than a formality. Derek was waiting to discard. And maybe that was what stung the most, not just the betrayal, but the audacity. Derek had made me feel small, like I was just another piece of his life he could set aside when he was done. He had underestimated me, and for that he was going to pay. I spent the next few weeks building my case. While he snuck around, believing he was the master of deception, I was moving money, quietly, carefully. I created new accounts, ones he had no access to. I rerouted direct deposits, ensuring that my income, the real financial backbone of our household, was untouchable. Then I took things a step further. I contacted our family lawyer, Patricia, and laid everything out. She listened, taking notes, her face impassive until I finished. Then she leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp with approval. "This is airtight," she said. "You're 3 steps ahead of him." I smiled. "I'm not done yet." With Patricia's help, we froze the joint accounts. Every penny Derek thought he had access to, gone. Every slush fund he had created under my nose, locked down. The house? The mortgage had been refinanced in my name alone. Derek had been so distracted with Chelsea, so sure I wouldn't notice anything, that he had signed documents without reading them. A fatal error. But the final nail in the coffin? The IRS. Derek, in his arrogance, had shifted company funds to cover some of his personal spending. That was embezzlement. I compiled everything: bank statements, receipts, business expenses that didn't line up, and sent an anonymous tip. By the time graduation day rolled around, I had built an ironclad trap. Derek thought he was about to stage his grand escape, believing he was the mastermind. But he wasn't prepared for me. As I stood there, watching the realization dawn on his face, watching Chelsea start to panic, I felt something I hadn't in months. Power. Derek had spent years thinking I was the passive, accommodating wife, the woman who would stand by his side no matter what, who would let things go, who would cry and plead and beg. He had no idea who I really was. And now, it was too late. I knew that gathering financial evidence was only half the battle. Derek was the type of man who believed that money was power, that as long as he controlled the finances, he controlled the narrative. What he didn't understand was that I had spent years watching him, learning how he operated, how he manipulated situations to his advantage. He was used to being the one in charge, making decisions without consequence. But this time, I was going to be the one pulling the strings. The next phase of my plan was all about information, not just knowing what he was doing, but understanding who he had working in his corner. Derek had always surrounded himself with people who catered to his ego, people who would tell him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to. His business partner, Ray, was one of them, a yes man who thrived under Derek's shadow, happy to ride his coattails as long as the money kept flowing. I knew if Derek had told anyone about his escape plan, it would be Ray. So I planted the bait. I casually mentioned over dinner one night that I was thinking about hiring a forensic accountant to review some minor discrepancies in our taxes. It was an offhand comment, tossed out between bites of steak, but I saw the way Derek's hand tightened around his fork, the way his jaw tensed just slightly before he forced a laugh. That night, I left my laptop open on the kitchen counter, with a spreadsheet of completely fabricated financial anomalies conveniently displayed. Nothing that would set off alarms, just enough to make him nervous. Sure enough, 2 days later, Ray called me. "Vivian." "Hey," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Just wanted to check in, see how things are going." I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. "Oh, busy as usual. Derek's been working a lot, so I've been handling most of the finances. Actually, I'm glad you called. I was meaning to ask you about some odd transfers I found in his business accounts. Any idea what those could be?" The pause on the other end of the line was all I needed. Ray cleared his throat. "I'm sure it's nothing. Derek is great with money. He'd never do anything shady." I let out a soft laugh. "Oh, of course not. But just in case, I think I'll have someone take a look. Better safe than sorry, right?" Another pause. This one longer. Then, hurriedly, "Yeah, sure. Just let me know what you find, okay?" That was confirmation. Derek was worried. I didn't need to wait long to see the effects of my little game. The next morning, I noticed his behavior shift. He started double-checking our mail before I could get to it, making vague comments about streamlining expenses. He even suggested we close a few joint accounts, claiming it would make things simpler. I smiled and agreed, telling him I'd handle all the paperwork. Of course, I didn't. Instead, I contacted my lawyer, Patricia, and had her prepare a full forensic audit request. I wanted every penny traced, every suspicious transfer logged. Derek thought he was being clever, that he could move things around without me noticing. But what he didn't realize was that I had already frozen every account he had access to. A week later, I got the call I had been waiting for. "Vivian," Patricia's voice was laced with amusement. "I think you're going to like this. Derek's been transferring money to an account in the Cayman Islands under his name. Sloppy, easily traceable. And the best part? Some of it came directly from his company's accounts. That's embezzlement." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I had him. But I wasn't done. It was time to turn up the heat. I met with Laura, a friend of mine who worked in HR at Derek's company. She had always been polite to Derek, but had never liked him. She saw through his charm, his self-importance. When I told her what I had found, her lips pressed together in a thin line. I had a feeling, she admitted. Chelsea's been overly friendly with the executives. I wouldn't be surprised if she pushed for a transfer to stay close to him. I nodded. She did. Hawaii. And I need proof. Laura's eyes glinted. Consider it done. By the end of the week, I had copies of every email Derek had sent to Chelsea, discussing their new life together, their plans to sell our house, liquidate assets, move to Hawaii without a second thought about me or Madison. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even about the affair. It was about the audacity, the absolute disregard for the life we had built, the family we had created. Derek didn't just betray me, he discarded me. Like I was nothing. That's when I decided he wouldn't just lose money. He wouldn't just lose Chelsea. Once she realized he was a sinking ship, he would lose everything. I prepared a detailed file, financial records, bank statements, proof of tax fraud, evidence of his affair. Then I sent an anonymous tip to his company's board of directors. By the time graduation day arrived, the board had already started an internal review. Derek didn't know it yet, but his entire career was about to go up in flames. And the best part? He still thought he was in control. As I stood there, watching him gloat, watching him make his grand speech about leaving me, about starting fresh, I felt nothing but satisfaction, because he had no idea that in just a matter of moments, his entire world was going to crumble. And I was going to be the one lighting the match. I had spent weeks setting the stage, carefully maneuvering every piece into place, ensuring that when Derek's downfall came, it would be swift, precise, and absolute. But there was still one last element I needed to solidify: timing. I didn't just want him to lose. I wanted him to lose publicly, to be left standing in the wreckage of his own arrogance with no way out. That meant choosing the right moment, the perfect stage, for his humiliation. And what better place than Madison's graduation, an event where he expected to bask in the glow of his own carefully constructed exit. Derek wasn't just cheating on me, he wasn't just stealing from me. He was erasing me, rewriting our history like I had never mattered, like the 20 years I spent by his side were nothing more than a placeholder for his new life with Chelsea. And what enraged me most wasn't even the betrayal, it was the certainty in his actions, the way he assumed I would crumble, that I would stand there dumbfounded while he waltzed away with everything. He had no idea that I had already burned his escape plan to the ground before he even had the chance to take his first step. The day before the graduation party, I sat in Patricia's office, the final details of our strategy falling into place. She shuffled through the documents, nodding in approval, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. "It's airtight," she said. "He won't even see it coming." "Good," I murmured, running my fingers over the thick stack of paperwork. "Because after tomorrow, he won't have anything left to run with." Patricia leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. "I also got word from Laura. The board has already begun reviewing Derek's financial transactions. The fraud charges are serious, Vivian. They're not going to let this slide." I let out a slow breath, absorbing the weight of those words. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. This was criminal. Derek had built his career on a house of cards, and I had just tipped the first one over. I left the office with one final stop in mind. Madison was home, finishing up her final graduation preparations, so I knew Derek wouldn't be around. I drove downtown, parked in front of the sleek glass building that housed his company, and stepped inside like I belonged there. And in a way, I did. I had supported Derek's career from day one, handled the books, balanced our investments. If anyone deserved to be here, it was me. The receptionist gave me a polite smile as I walked up. "Can I help you?" I returned the smile, slipping a crisp manila envelope onto the counter. "This needs to go directly to the board of directors. It's urgent." She hesitated. "I'm not sure. Trust me," I said, my tone even, unwavering. "They're expecting it." She nodded slowly, reaching for the envelope. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange lightness settle over me. Derek had spent months plotting his future, siphoning funds, orchestrating his perfect getaway. And with one signature, one sealed document, I had dismantled it all. I barely slept that night, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. It was like standing at the edge of a storm, knowing you had built the thunder yourself. I had imagined this moment for so long, visualized every detail, and now all I had to do was step back and let gravity do the rest. When the day arrived, I kept my expression calm, my demeanor unbothered, like a woman with nothing to lose. Derek, of course, was all smiles, shaking hands, making his rounds through the party like a man who believed he had already won. Chelsea was glued to his side, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction, oblivious to the fact that her dream life was seconds from disintegrating. And then, right on cue, Derek stood up to make his announcement. I watched the scene unfold as if I were watching a movie I had already seen 100 times. The way he clinked his glass, the way the crowd hushed in anticipation, the way his voice rang out, so self-assured, so certain that this was his moment of triumph. I almost wanted to laugh. He delivered his speech, his grand reveal, telling everyone that he and Chelsea were leaving tonight, that they were starting fresh, that he had handled everything. The words "our savings" came out of his mouth with such confidence that I nearly pitied him. Nearly. Chelsea beamed, stepping forward with her first-class tickets, waving them like a prize. And that's when I finally moved. I reached into my purse, pulling out the envelope that held everything: the divorce papers, the asset freeze, the forensic audit, the tax fraud evidence. I placed it on the table in front of Derek, watching as he faltered, his eyes flickering with the first hint of real fear. "What's this?" he asked, his voice suddenly less sure. "Oh," I said smoothly, "just a little something I prepared. Since you've been planning your exit for months, I figured I'd have a few things ready too." I could see it now, the way his face paled, the way his fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. Chelsea peeked over his shoulder, her smug expression vanishing as she saw the bank statements, the empty accounts, the IRS notices. "You," Derek's voice cracked. "You can't do this." I tilted my head. "Do what, exactly? Secure my finances? Expose your fraud? Make sure you don't get to steal from me and our daughter?" I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting the weight of my words settle. "Oh, Derek, I already did." Chelsea stumbled back, looking between us, her carefully crafted world shattering. "Wait, what does this mean?" I smiled, watching Derek struggle to find words. "It means, sweetheart, that your little vacation plans might be changing, unless you're interested in sharing a cell with him." The crowd erupted in murmurs, whispers spreading like wildfire. I could see Derek's business partner, Ray, in the back, his face twisted in horror, already realizing that their entire empire was about to crumble. Derek clenched his jaw, his hands shaking. "This is ridiculous. We can work something out." No, we can't," I interrupted, my voice sharp, final. "You made your choices, Derek, and now you get to live with them." I turned toward Madison, who was standing tall, proud, unshaken. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go celebrate your future." And as I walked away, leaving Derek to drown in the wreckage of his own destruction, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. Derek's hands were trembling now, his fingers gripping the edges of the divorce papers like they might somehow change if he just held onto them tight enough. His confident, smug demeanor had vanished, replaced with something raw and desperate. I could see the panic settling in, the way his mind was scrambling to find an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Not after what I had done. He had walked into this day thinking he was the one orchestrating the perfect exit. Instead, he was standing in the ruins of his own making, exposed and helpless, surrounded by the people who had once admired him. The whispers had started, murmurs rippling through the crowd as my friends, family, and colleagues absorbed what was happening. The once pristine image Derek had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling in real time, and there was no stopping it. Chelsea was still by his side, but barely. I could see the shift in her posture, the hesitation in her eyes as she processed the reality of the situation. She had clung to Derek because he was a sure thing, a powerful, successful man who promised her a life of luxury and security. But as she stared at the bank statements, the frozen accounts, the IRS investigation notice, it was clear she was realizing she had backed the wrong horse. She had latched onto him, thinking he was her golden ticket. Now he was nothing but a sinking ship, and she was about to go down with him. "Derek," she whispered, her voice shaking now, not with triumph, but with fear. "What is she talking about?" Derek ignored her, his eyes locked onto mine. There was no anger now, no arrogance, just raw pleading. "Vivian," he said, and for the first time in months, he actually said my name like it meant something. "Let's talk about this. In private?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Derek. We're doing this here, in front of everyone. The same way you planned to humiliate me. The same way you wanted to erase me and start fresh like I never existed." I took a step forward, lowering my voice just enough that only he could hear me. "How does it feel, Derek? How does it feel to be the one left with nothing?" His jaw clenched, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. He was grasping at straws, trying to salvage even the smallest piece of control. "You're making a mistake," he hissed under his breath. "We can work something out. We can split things fairly?" I almost laughed. Fairly? The man who had been siphoning money into offshore accounts, who had planned to leave me with scraps, was now talking about fairness? I let out a slow breath, mocking sympathy lacing my tone. "Oh, Derek, I already did. You just didn't realize it." Chelsea, growing more agitated, snatched the papers from his hands, frantically scanning them. "What the hell does this mean?" she snapped. "Why is everything frozen?" I turned to her then, giving her the same polite smile I had used in the past when she was just his assistant, just the woman who lingered a little too close. "It means, sweetheart, that your sugar daddy is officially broke." Well, not broke exactly, just completely cut off from every single account he thought he had access to. I let the words sink in, watching the realization hit her like a freight train. "I hope you kept your return ticket because I don't think that beachfront property in Hawaii is happening anytime soon." Chelsea's face blanched, her hand tightening into a fist before she whipped around to Derek, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his arm. "Tell me she's lying," she demanded, her voice rising. "Tell me this is a joke." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was a perfect mix of fury and helplessness, like a man watching his entire kingdom burn with no way to stop the flames. Chelsea saw it too, because within seconds, her grip on his arm loosened, her posture straightened, and then, just like that, the turning point happened. She stepped away from him. "I'm not doing this," she muttered, shaking her head. "I'm not going down with you." Derek turned, panic flaring in his eyes. "Chelsea, number 7. She cut him off coldly, backing away as if just being near him might ruin her life too. "You told me everything was handled. You said we'd be fine," she scoffed, tossing the papers back at him. "You lied to me." And just like that, she was gone, pushing through the crowd and disappearing into the parking lot. I didn't even need to watch her leave. I knew she wouldn't be coming back. Derek exhaled sharply, his hands clenching into tight fists, his entire body vibrating with rage. He turned back to me, his voice lowering into something dangerous, something that might have scared me once. "You think you've won?" he growled. I tilted my head, amusement flickering in my expression. "Haven't I?" He took a step forward, but before he could say another word, a new voice cut through the air. "Don't." Madison's voice was steady, unwavering, filled with a disappointment that struck deeper than any of my words ever could. Derek froze, his head turned, his gaze landing on our daughter, who had been standing there, watching everything unfold. Madison, he started, but she shook her head. No. Her voice was firm, filled with something almost unrecognizable contempt. You don't get to talk to me like I'm a child. You don't get to stand there and act like the victim when you did this. You did this to us. Derek visibly flinched. For all his bravado, for all his scheming, he hadn't prepared for this. He thought he could steal our money, walk away, and still have his daughter's love. But he had lost her too. I watched as his shoulders slumped, the fight finally draining out of him. I think it's time for you to leave, Madison said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. You've ruined enough of today already. And that was it. The moment Derek truly lost everything. As he stood there, his entire world crashing down around him, I felt nothing but peace. I had spent months planning for this, making sure that when the moment came, he wouldn't just lose, he would lose completely. And now, as I looked at him, standing alone, abandoned, defeated, I realized something. He wasn't worth my anger anymore. I turned away, wrapping an arm around Madison's shoulders. Come on, sweetheart, I said, my voice lighter than it had been in months. Let's go celebrate. And as we walked away, Derek's presence faded into nothing, swallowed by the sound of laughter and clinking glasses as the party continued without him. The silence that followed Madison's words was deafening. It was the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and thick, as if the whole room is holding its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. Derek stood there, frozen, his eyes wide as he tried to find the words to justify the unforgivable. But there were no words. There was nothing he could say to make up for what he'd done. Not to me, not to Madison, not to the life we had built together, and deep down, I knew he understood that. I could see the sweat starting to bead on his forehead, the panic creeping into his expression. The mask he'd so carefully crafted for years, the charming businessman, the loving father was slipping, unraveling in front of everyone. The man who thought he could control every situation, every person, every outcome, was now standing at the edge of a cliff, about to fall hard. The people who had once admired him, who had looked up to him as the leader, the successful man, were now staring at him with a mix of disbelief and contempt. He was a fraud, a con man, and everyone was starting to see it. Madison, still standing tall beside me, didn't flinch. Her expression was like a mask of stone, like she had already grieved the father she had once idolized. She had trusted him, believed in him, but in the span of a few hours, Derek had destroyed that trust beyond repair. The look in her eyes was no longer one of a daughter looking up to her father. It was a daughter who had finally seen the truth about who he really was. And for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of pride in her. She was no longer the little girl who had believed every word he said. She was a young woman, strong and unafraid of him. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion but steady. "You don't have to do this anymore." Her words were for both of us, but they stung Derek like a slap across the face. "You've done enough. Let him deal with the mess he's made." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. As much as I had held on to the plan, the strategy, the months of careful preparation, I hadn't realized just how much I had been holding on to anger, how much I had been carrying the weight of his betrayal on my shoulders. But in that moment, with Madison standing beside me, I felt the weight lift. Derek wasn't my responsibility anymore. Not his lies, not his deceit, not the way he had dragged us both through the dirt. I was done carrying his mistakes. Derek opened his mouth again, but the words died on his lips. He looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had once respected him, and it was clear that no amount of pleading, no smooth words, would undo the damage he had caused. He was out of options. "You're pathetic," Madison's voice broke through the silence. "You always were. I don't know why it took me so long to see it." Derek's face twisted in anger, but there was no fight left in him. His shoulders sagged, the weight of his shame crushing him. He turned toward me, and for the first time I saw something other than arrogance and control in his eyes. I saw regret. It wasn't the kind of regret that said he was sorry for what he had done. No, this was the regret of someone who realized he had lost it all, and it was too late to get it back. "Vivian, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, desperation leaking through. "You know we've had our issues, but we can fix this. I never wanted to hurt you. Stop," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm, like I was addressing a child. There was no need for him to finish, no need for more excuses. He had made his choice. He had chosen her. He had chosen to tear apart everything we had worked for. And now he had to live with the consequences. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore," I continued, the words coming out with an authority I didn't know I still had. "I spent 20 years by your side, supporting you, raising our daughter, building this life with you, and you think you can just walk away like it means nothing? Like we mean nothing?" I saw him wince, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to comfort him. I wasn't here to help him save face or try to salvage what was left of his reputation. I was here to make sure that, for once, he would face the full weight of his actions. "You took everything from me, Derek," I said, my voice quiet now, but carrying a weight he could feel. "You took my trust, you took my dignity, you took our daughter's future, and you thought you could get away with it. But I'm done. I'm done letting you destroy me. I'm done being the one who holds everything together while you ruin it." The room had gone completely still. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this would unfold. I could feel their eyes on me, on him, the shock still rippling through the crowd. But I didn't care about them. Not anymore. This was my moment. Derek had thought I would break, thought I would beg him to stay, to try to fix everything. But no, I was done playing that role. The woman who had once been so afraid of losing him, so desperate to hold on to the marriage, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found her power, who had found her strength in the face of betrayal. I could see Derek's eyes searching mine, looking for something. But there was nothing left for him. He had taken everything he could, and now he had nothing to show for it. "You think you've won?" he finally muttered, his voice shaking with frustration. "You think you've beaten me?" I stepped closer, my heels clicking sharply on the floor, my eyes never leaving his. "You've been beaten from the start, Derek," I said, my voice low, controlled, and I didn't need to lift a finger. With that, I turned, wrapping my arm around Madison's shoulders as we walked away from the wreckage of what had once been my life with Derek. The crowd parted as we moved through them, but none of their whispers or stares mattered anymore. I had already won. Derek could stand there and squirm. He could try to salvage what was left of his pride, but the truth was, he had lost everything, and I had gained everything. As we stepped into the bright daylight outside, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The storm was over, and now I was ready for whatever came next. I could feel the shift in the air as soon as I walked away from Derek. The room was buzzing, but not with the excitement or joy that had filled it just moments ago. No, now it was thick with confusion, disbelief, and something else, a kind of awe. Derek had spent so many years building his persona, presenting himself as the perfect husband, the perfect businessman, the perfect father, and in just a few minutes I had pulled it all apart. I didn't look back, not even once. There was nothing to see but his failure, his disappointment, and I was done with it, done with him. Madison's hand slipped into mine as we walked away from the chaos, and for the first time that day, I felt a deep sense of peace. The weight that had been on my shoulders for months, for years, was finally starting to lift. We had fought so hard for our place in the world, for our family, for a life we could be proud of. Derek had torn it all apart, thinking he could just leave, start fresh, and take everything with him. But I had won. I had taken back what was mine, and I wasn't just talking about the money, the house, or the possessions. No, I had taken back my dignity, my strength, and most importantly, I had taken back my daughter. As we stepped out into the cool evening air, I could still hear the echoes of Derek's words, the panic in his voice as he tried to explain himself, tried to justify his actions. I didn't care. The truth had already been exposed, and there was no going back. No matter what he said now, the damage had been done. It wasn't just the money he had stolen or the life he had tried to build with Chelsea. It was the years of trust he had shattered. It was the love I had given him that he had thrown away like it meant nothing. Madison squeezed my hand, her voice soft but firm. "You did it, Mom," she said. Her words simple, but full of so much more. "You're finally free." I turned to look at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't just the hurt and confusion that had been there before. It was a sense of pride not just in me, but in herself. She had witnessed everything. She had seen her father for what he truly was, and she had stood strong. She had stood beside me, even when it would have been easier to walk away. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her, for the future we were going to build together, without the shadow of Derek looming over us. We didn't speak much as we drove away from the venue, the city lights of Austin reflecting in the rearview mirror. It was like the past few hours hadn't just been a series of events. They had been a transition, from one life to another, from one identity to a completely new one. Derek had defined so much of who I was for so long. His expectations, his needs, his control had shaped my every move. But now, I was stepping into a world where I could finally define myself. No longer tied to his mistakes, his lies, or his betrayals. I was free. We pulled into the driveway of our house, the one that Derek had thought he could just walk away from, the one he had planned to sell. He had thought it was his, but it wasn't. It was mine. And now, it wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of survival, of strength, and of everything I had worked to protect. As Madison and I stepped inside, I felt the familiar comfort of our home surround us. But it was different now. It wasn't just the place where we had lived, it was now the place where we would rebuild, where I would heal, where Madison would learn to trust again, and where we would start a new chapter without him. The next few days were a blur of phone calls with my lawyer, with the bank, with the people who had been there to help me set everything in motion. Derek was fighting back, of course. He was trying to claim that the documents I had presented weren't valid, that I had fabricated everything. But it didn't matter. The truth was already out there. The evidence was undeniable. He had tried to steal from us, to take everything and run, but instead, he had left himself exposed, vulnerable, and with nothing. It was strange, really. For so long, I had been the one holding everything together, the one who had to make sure everything worked, even when Derek was absent, even when he was focused on his own self-interest. But now, I didn't have to hold anything up anymore. I didn't have to carry the weight of his mistakes on my shoulders. I was free, and I realized something. I didn't need him. Madison and I went on with our days, slowly getting back to a routine, but everything had shifted. Even something as simple as making dinner together felt different now. We had a new sense of security, a new sense of hope, and as much as I had been terrified of what life would look like without Derek, I found myself embracing it. I didn't have to live in the shadow of his decisions anymore. I could finally live for me, for Madison, and for the future we were going to create. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still moments when I would catch myself thinking about Derek, wondering what he was doing, where he was. But those moments became fewer and farther between, and every time they popped up, I reminded myself of one simple truth: he didn't matter anymore. He was just a man who had destroyed his own life, and in the process, he had lost everything that ever mattered. Madison and I spent that summer taking small trips, visiting places we had always talked about, making memories that weren't tied to Derek, to the past. And with every passing day, I felt myself becoming more and more whole, more confident, and more aware of the power I had within me. Derek had tried to take that power from me. He had tried to diminish me, to make me feel small, insignificant. But he had failed. He didn't know who he was messing with. He didn't know the woman I had become. And as we looked ahead to the future, I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever hold me back again. It was a strange feeling, that sense of finality, of knowing the worst was behind me. I had spent so many months, so many sleepless nights, preparing for this day, waiting for everything to fall into place. And now that it had, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The chaos, the pain, the hurt, everything had been washed away in one single powerful moment. Derek thought he could walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing. But in the end, he was the one left with nothing, while I walked away with my dignity, my daughter, and the future I had built for myself. As I sat in Patricia's office a week after the graduation, reviewing the final settlement papers, I couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction wash over me. The legal battle was nearly over, and I had come out victorious. Derek had fought tooth and nail to retain control, to maintain some semblance of his perfect life, but it was no use. His money was gone, his reputation was destroyed, and now his future was uncertain. He would never get back the life he had once taken for granted, and as I signed the last page of the settlement agreement, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the final note in a long, grueling symphony of deceit, betrayal, and revenge. When Patricia slid the final documents across the table to me, I could almost hear the closure. "This is it," Patricia said, her voice soft but filled with approval. "You've done it. Everything's in place. Derek's not going to be able to turn this around." I looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I don't think he'll even try. He's not the same man anymore," Patricia nodded. "It's over, Vivian. He's finished. He may not know it yet, but the wheels are already in motion." And that was the truth of it. Derek's downfall had already begun. The board at his company was reviewing everything, and his sudden departure, along with the affair, had already raised enough red flags for a full investigation. His entire career was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and I had made sure that when it fell, it would fall hard. I had to admit, there was a small part of me that felt vindicated. After all the lies, the manipulation, the way he had tried to control every aspect of our lives, his career, his image, even our family, I had exposed him for who he really was. It wasn't just about the money or the assets. It was about proving that he couldn't walk away unscathed. He had thought he could hide behind his wealth and his charm, that he could control me and Madison for as long as he wanted. But he had underestimated me. The phone rang, and I saw it was Madison calling. I smiled as I answered, hearing the warmth in her voice as she greeted me. "Hey, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "Better than I've felt in years," I said, leaning back in the chair, letting the weight of everything I had accomplished settle into my bones. "I'm finally at peace. We're finally free, Maddie." "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know this wasn't easy, but you've shown me what it means to stand up for yourself." I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting the lump in my throat. I had raised her to be strong, independent, and capable of handling whatever life threw her way. But I had never imagined she would learn that lesson so soon, at such a young age. And yet, there she was, a young woman, standing beside me, facing the truth about her father. I could feel the pride in her words, the respect she had for me now, and it made everything worth it. All the sacrifices, all the heartache, it had all led to this moment. "I've always been proud of you, Maddie," I said softly. "You've grown into someone I can look up to, and I'm lucky to have you by my side. You're the best thing I've ever done." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I love you, Mom," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "I don't ever want to go through something like this again, but if I had to, I'd want to be with you." Tears welled in my eyes as I fought to keep my voice steady. "We don't have to go through anything like this again. We're done with him, Maddie. We've moved on. Yeah, she agreed, her voice firm. We have. It was then that I realized, in a way, this had been a blessing in disguise. Derek's betrayal had opened my eyes to what really mattered. It had given me the strength to reclaim my life, to let go of the fears that had held me back for so long. I wasn't the woman I had been before. I was stronger, smarter, and ready to face whatever came next. I didn't need Derek's approval, his validation, or his control. I had everything I needed in myself and in Madison. The next few days were filled with small, quiet victories. I made a list of things. I wanted to do things I had put off for years because I had been too busy keeping everything together, too focused on making everyone else happy. Now, it was time to focus on me, on what I wanted. I signed up for a financial course to deepen my knowledge and broaden my skills. I scheduled a vacation, just Madison and me, a long weekend at a lake house where we could reconnect, not as victims of Derek's lies, but as two women ready to start a new chapter. And then there was the house. The home Derek had wanted to sell, the one he had planned to leave it was mine. I'd refinanced it in my name, making sure there was no way he could touch it. I'd hired a decorator to help me transform the spaces that once felt like prison bars into a home that felt like a sanctuary, a place of healing, a place where we could be free. I didn't care what Derek thought about it. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about us. The most surprising part of all of this, though, was the peace I felt in my heart. For so long, I had carried anger and hurt inside of me. I had let those feelings control me, let them dictate my every action. But now, there was nothing left to hold on to. Derek's betrayal was a chapter closed, a part of my life that was over, and I was ready to turn the page. I didn't need to carry that weight anymore. I was free, and I could finally breathe again. The next month was a blur of small but significant changes, Madison and I spending more time together, laughing more, sharing stories, taking trips, building our lives back up piece by piece. I had my freedom, and I had her. What else could I ask for? Derek had tried to break me, to destroy everything I had worked for, but all he had really done was make me stronger. I was no longer the woman who waited in the shadows, unsure of her own worth. I was the woman who stood in the light, unafraid, and ready to take on whatever came next. I had won. Just when Derek thought he had the perfect escape planned, I completely changed the game. I'd spent months setting up the ultimate trap. His lies were exposed and his perfect world fell apart. But here's the kicker, what he didn't know was I had already set everything in motion. You're probably wondering, how did I pull it off? Well, you've got to hear the rest to find out. Hit that like button if you're as shocked as I was and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The lesson I learned through all of this is that you never give up on yourself. No one, not even the person you trust the most, has the power to define your worth. We all face betrayals, hardships, and moments where it feels like everything is slipping away, but you have to stand strong. Don't be afraid to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your future. In the end, the only person who can truly control your happiness is you. Never let anyone take that from you.